Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to the IATA webinar, Leading in the New Normal. So this is a live webinar, and you can only hear presenters because your microphone has been put on mute. If you want to interact with us, you can do so using the questions box to interact, and just need to enter your questions in the chat box on the right. This event is recorded, so even if you miss the beginning, you can still catch up on the full session. And once the full video once the session will be over, you will be able to find the video on our website, iata.org/face. So today I'm here with Patricia. And our guest speaker today is Edward. So Edward is a managing partner within CCM Consultancy, and he has more than 20 years of experience in human resources, financial services, and so on. And he will be able to share light with us on how to manage in this new context, leading in the new normal. So what we will go through today is to just to give you a very short introduction of the FACE program. Then we'll hand over to Edward, who will present the content. And at the end of the session, we'll have a few minutes for your questions and answer. So the FACE mission is to attract and retain and develop a bright pool of individuals under 36 to foster innovation thinking. And our objective is to prepare them to become the next generation of leader for the air cargo industry. You can find more information on our website, iata.org/face. Now I hand over to Patricia, who will present a bit of the FACE program itself.
Yes, thank you, David. The FACE program, the Future Air Cargo Executives program, was structured around 3 pillars. The first one is awareness and attraction, so attracting people to the air cargo industry. The second one is to retain the talent that we have and develop it to grow into the industry. And finally, there is a new pillar, which is the innovation and creativity one, which is like how we can transform and contribute to grow in this industry. FACE has traditionally a set of activities. The biggest of one is the FACE Summit that normally takes place together with the WCS in March. We also have other networking events. We have a Facebook community, we have a cocktail. And recently we also have developed a new activity in this pillar, which is the FACE Peer Mentorship Program that we are going to describe a bit later. In the attracting part, we also have what we call the FACE Up competition that was supposed to take place during WCS 2020 and has been postponed to WCS 2021, which is basically an invite to students to submit their thesis and innovative ideas for the air cargo industry. And next year, we will try to do a career fair to actually reach out to students and attract them into the cargo industry. Finally, in the innovation area, we also have what we call the Vision 2030 white paper and working group, which was done in the period 2017-2018. Talking about mentorship and the importance of our industry to stay together, particularly in the current situation, we launched in December 2019 a new program. It's the mentorship program. We do it through our Facebook community. And it pairs former and current FACE members to help them know other parts of the industry, create their own network, and grow together. So far, we have 5 mentors registered. Over time, we have 8 mentor-mentee pairs that succeeded through the program. The system is open, it's available for everybody to participate. And we have also opened a survey, which you can see below in case you want to submit your feedback on what works, what doesn't work, what you would like to see in this FACE mentorship program. And yeah, without further ado, I welcome Edward to present on leading the new normal. Thank you, Edward.
Thank you very much, Patricia, and thank you to David. On behalf of CCM Consultancy, we really appreciate the opportunity to address the members of the community of faith, especially over the years that the work that we've done. We're going to focus today on what we call leading in the new normal, and hopefully by the end of this webinar, you'll get some ideas and tips on what's going to happen and what you need to do in order to be able to cope during what has been quite the challenging time, no matter what the industry is. And certainly in aviation and even in air cargo, there's been a lot that's been going on here. At the end of this, you're going to also be receiving a link which has a digital booklet, which will have some of the content of this webinar and the tips that are also included in there. Now, there's been a lot of mayhem as we're going through, and I find as people have been coming back into the office, it's been quite hectic. In fact, it's been really a difficult time for a lot of people as they cope that while some people are still home, some people are back in the workplace. And if we go to the next slide, you'll notice some of you are coming back to desks that look as such. And you're dealing with chaos almost. And for those of you, by the way, that tell me, no, Edward, look, we're digital, I've gone paperless. Well, your slide maybe or your desktop screen looks like this instead. And that's not any better. This is really a reflection of what's going on in our world today and how complex everything has happened and how overwhelmed we tend to be. So when we look at that and we consider the new world that's out there, or what is this new world? If we can go to the next slide on this here. It is a world that has left us now in a state of confusion. That is a very big element of what's going on there. Beyond that, we're dealing also with the fact that there's a lack of time that we're dealing with. We seem to have run out of that. No matter how much more and more we add, we're simply not coping with that enough. We seem to be juggling multiple tasks as we're going on. We're taking on more than we used to in the past and having to deal with that. We're dealing with concerns, not just our own, but also of others around us. And that's certainly making things very difficult for us. And beyond that, there's a sense that we're losing control. And these are all major issues that we have to really be able to combat when it comes to this new world that we're in there if we're going to succeed moving forward. The fact of the matter is, if you look at just about every organization right now, it looks like an invisible war zone. We've come back from difficult times. We're still dealing with difficult times. And rather than coming together, we seem to be in this interdepartmental war that's taking place. And what this done is have an impact on us as individuals and teams where we might have been considered a football team at one point, quite united, but instead of being this football team, we are now acting as a team of footballers, where each to each his own. We're focusing on our tasks, our responsibilities, and nothing more than that. And that's something that we really have to address in the new normal. Now, if we take a look at this and we say to ourselves, well, how do we lead? What has to happen moving forward? And before I address the 5 pillars or elements that we're going to talk about today, it really starts with us. And this is such a critical element that we have to keep in mind. First and foremost, it's about leading by example. That means maintaining great habits. For those of you that are still on a work from home scenario, please understand, just because you're not physically there does not mean that the team cannot see you. That means we have to make sure that we are front and center, whether virtually or physically, and lead by example at all times. More importantly, it's about self-motivation. Our team is counting on us for hope. It's about finding the fire within us and staying motivated. Nobody else is going to find that for us. And for those of you that are in leadership positions, it's your responsibility to be able to self-motivate before you look outwards to your team and help them out. A very small tip for those of you that don't already do this, we do this in every organization that we're involved in, calendar sharing. Make sure that you share your calendar and vice versa. Let people know what you're doing and where you are at all times. That's the only way we're going to be able to come together and recognize where people are and utilize the time that we have effectively. Also, I would urge you to carve out personal time. With all of us having worked from home in the last little while, and some of us still are, we seem that the lines have become blurred between work time and personal life, and we have to leave that time for us to recharge and be able to move forward. Otherwise, nobody can count on us, let alone ourselves. Another point I would bring up is this notion of a collaborative ecosystem. And I know for many this comes as second nature, but I would urge you to use any kind of platform that keeps you connected with your teams, whether it's WhatsApp, Teams, Zoom, or anything else, but making sure in today's environment that we stay as collaborative as possible and engaged as possible becomes very important. And last but not least, I would bring up time management. This pandemic has really thrown us for a loop when it comes to how we utilize our time. And I have to constantly remember to remind people to think of time as money. And just like we wouldn't throw dollar bills or whatever else around, we certainly wouldn't do that with time, or shouldn't be doing that with time. And we need to start to utilize that wisely, considering what's going on and the pressures that we're on these days. So for us to succeed in the new normal, we really have to look at some of the leadership traits that are out there. What is it that makes great leaders what they are? And the first of which is their ability to respond to the environment before it forces change on them. And that's such a critical one. This is not because they're clairvoyant and they know what's happening, but their ability to respond to change is quite high. They're also fantastic relationship builders. They have the ability of building great relationships and maintaining that on the long term. And I'm going to get to this point a little bit later on in this webinar. We're going to delve into what it takes to be able to do that. They also happen to be flexible and proactive. They're not bound by rigidity or this notion that things have to be done in a certain way. They're considered open and tolerant to new ideas, and that's just as important as well. Long gone are the days for us when we say, this is how we used to do things, this is how it goes. On the contrary, it's about openness and tolerance that's going out there now. So this notion of their reaction to change does not involve rigidity is such an important point that's there also. They're not, again, like I said, bound by the rules of the organization and what they're being told at all times. And they tend to defy the status quo. That is one of the critical traits that they have. They go out there not because they're mavericks, but rather they question everything that's going on before they move further. And most importantly, they plan for uncertainties. And that's a critical point that's there. The ability to be able to move forward when it comes to what's happening. And like I said, not because they're clairvoyant, but rather they know that there's going to be uncertainty and they're going to plan for it accordingly. So what we need to consider is that when leadership breaks down, there's a number of reasons for that. And we have to look at it, and I often refer to this as managerial problems. Whether it's the efficiencies or our recognition or the goals or priorities, leadership breaks down when people simply do not know where to go. And please bear that in mind. This is our responsibility as leaders to be able to clarify that. And in some instances, they know where to go, but they don't know how to get there. And that too is our responsibility and nobody else's. And in some cases, it's broken down because simply people cannot agree on the ends and the means. And that's, again, in our hands to make sure that there's this clarity in communication. And I'm going to talk about that and address that even further. They haven't identified the challenges, and leadership starts to break down. We're unsure what it is we're really tackling. And it could very well be that we do not share the same picture of the situation, and that certainly causes a problem within leadership and within the organization as a whole. And ultimately, it could be that they don't know what their roles are and how or where to contribute. And that seems to be a leading factor, particularly in times of crisis, on how people are able to cope. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we refer to as effective team clusters. And for organizations to be successful, there are 4 clusters that we look at. There's the leadership cluster, the ethos, the skills, and the direction. And for the purpose of today, I'm focusing on a particular element. It's the direction cluster. And the direction cluster says, everyone identifies with the vision. In fact, success criteria in the organization is shared. The team is organized around that criteria, and everyone is willing to change instantly when required. And most importantly, the team can overcome obstacles. Now, the reason I bring this up is because for us, this notion of vision and everybody identifying with it is such a critical aspect of our success. In fact, so much so, the leadership focus areas that I'm going to talk about and share with you today really start with vision. And you'll understand that without clarity and without our understanding of what that vision is and how we're going to get there, it becomes very difficult for us to apply the upcoming focus areas. What are they? Over the course of the next 35 or 40 minutes, I'm going to talk to you about the following areas. The first of which is productivity. We're going to spend a little bit of time to understand what that means, particularly during these times. We're going to talk about quality. We're going to talk about team and company pulse. We're going to delve into relationship management, in fact, right now. And last but not least, we're going to talk about continuous learning. Now, what does this all mean? And let's start off with relationship management. I said earlier that great leadership traits, or the traits of great leaders, does start with they're relationship builders. And this really comes down to this notion of relationship management. And for us, relationship management comes down to one big thing, and it's trust. And for us to be able to build trust, there's an equation that we utilize. And I hope that you'll be able to understand what this all means and how you can apply that. The first component of trust is what we refer to as credibility. And by credibility, I mean how you are viewed as an individual within the organization. If I have trusting relationship with people, do I have this notion of credibility within them? Am I viewed as a credible individual in their eyes? The second component in there is what we call intimacy. And that intimacy refers to how close is the relationship, that friendship that exists. Do I know these individuals as people or simply as colleagues or team members? And the last piece of that is reliability. And that piece talks about how reliable are they? Can people depend on me within the organization? Now, before we go any further, I'm going to give you an example of this here. I'm a huge, for example, 007 fan, James Bond. And while I was, of course, disappointed that the movie launch was delayed till November, I completely understand considering the difficult times. But let's say it's finally here and I can't wait. I bought my tickets a month in advance and I'm so excited about going to see this movie. And in fact, the day finally arrived and it's Friday and I'm about to leave the office. On my way out, one of my colleagues sees me and asks what I'm doing. I tell him, I'm so excited. I'm about to see the Bond movie tonight. And he says, oh my goodness, don't do it. I caught a bootleg copy on the internet last night. Worst Bond movie ever. Now, that'd be very disappointing, of course, to hear, but my brain does a very quick calculation. The first thing it asks is this person credible? Are they knowledgeable in the movie industry, in James Bond movies? Are they able to give me advice that I should be considering as a credible source of information? The second element is the level of intimacy. How well do they know me to give me this kind of information? And the last piece of that is reliability. Have they given me movie advice in the past and they were right and or wrong about that? And that's their level of reliability. You see, the brain does a very quick calculation and maybe even gives it a scoring from 1 to 5 on level of credibility, level of intimacy, and the level of reliability. And it sends me a trigger on whether or not I can trust this person. But the thing is, we are all human beings, and that equation can be further reduced by the denominator that we refer to as self-orientation, our dependence on ourselves and whether or not that carries weight within it. So you see, even with my example of the 007 movie, and this person was highly credible, highly intimate with me, and highly reliable, and I might have given it a 15 out of 15, but then my self-orientation kicks in, and I've got a high level of self-orientation, that's a 5, and that reduces the level of trust in the advice that I'm getting. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is we have to reflect with our teams and our colleagues and understand where are we within this equation on credibility, intimacy, and reliability. You see, self-orientation today is extremely high with people. There's news coming at them from all over the place. They're not trusting as much as they used to. They're relying on themselves more and more considering the crisis. And that means we can only control that top line. And our job, our responsibility is to make sure that with each individual that we interact with, we build further our credibility, our intimacy, and reliability, and not worry about the self-orientation that's there. When we do so, we start to expand our trust circle and the relationships that we have. And the reason this has become so important in relationship management is because today, the amount of information that's coming at us is absolutely enormous. But the problem is, it's coming in bits and pieces. And if we go to the next slide, you'll notice we talk about framing the big picture. In fact, so much so that it is our responsibility to show our teams the bigger picture of what's going on and ensure that there's a level of transparency. You see, if they're looking at the current situation here, they might be only seeing a small piece of the puzzle. They might be looking at the elephant's trunk and think this is a snake. They might be looking at the side and think it's a wall, but the fact of the matter is they're not seeing the entire story. As leaders, we have that responsibility. In fact, it's about setting context to the communication. And as the old adage says, 1 ounce of pre-framing is worth more than a ton of reframing and post-framing. And that's our responsibility to do that. But there's something I would warn you about, and it's the level of listening of people. You see, messages sometimes have to be repeated multiple times because there are various levels of listening that we go through. And the first level of listening, and that goes to you that are on the call plus your team members. The first level we refer to as ignoring. And this is the, it might sound a little bit bizarre, but this is the level that we're all in at all times. There's a lot of noise around us. We're not paying attention to everything, and we tend to ignore the noise that's around us. Now, the second level of listening is what we refer to as pretending to listen. And for those of you that have been with colleagues or you have team members, you might recognize exactly what I'm talking about here, where, in fact, we've mastered the art of pretending to listen. We know how to nod and say the, yeah, yes, I'm with you, but we're not necessarily paying attention. We're pretending to listen. And that's a very critical area and a devastating area when it comes to engaging others and building relationships. The third level of listening is what we refer to as selective listening. And this here is where we're simply gathering pieces of information, but we're multitasking. We're doing so many things at the same time, but we're kind of in tune with what's happening. And this happens in practically every team meeting that's going on there. In every organization, we tend to practice this notion of selective listening, and it's not exactly valuable. The fourth level, however, is what we refer to as attentive listening, where we are actually fully engaged with the individual. Whether we are the listener or we are the speaker, we are practicing this notion of attentive listening, and we're engaged with individuals. But however, there's still a fifth level of listening, and that's what we refer to as empathic listening. And this is where not only are we attentive, but rather we are engaging emotionally with others, and we're recognizing the various sways of emotion that are taking place. Our job as leaders, particularly in these challenging times, is to ensure that we maintain a level of attentive and empathic listening. And that also goes to that if you're going to demand that from your team members, it is also your responsibility to convey that to your team members by ensuring that you're there in the moment when they're speaking, when they're in your office, when they're in a meeting, and of the sort, just as much as you would demand it from them. And we've got to really work hard on that to ensure that we develop that level of relationship management. I'm going to move on to the next point, which is this notion of productivity. And productivity has become such an important element these days for a very simple reason. We're in the middle of a crisis. All we're talking about is we've got to get back to the high numbers of what we used to produce and so on, not recognizing that the world is made up of facts as much as it's made up of feelings. So we have the world of facts, and that's the bottom line world, our turnover, our production, our sales, our profits, and so on. But we also have the world of feelings of teamwork, anger, commitment, ownership, willingness, and friendliness. And there's a balance between these two elements, and it's our job as leaders to make sure that we recognize that as we move into demanding more productivity of our individuals. We have to balance these two out. And here's a few pieces of information or tips that I would give you when it comes to productivity. The first of which is ensure that if you're still holding virtual meetings, make sure that they're video conferencing meetings, that you're actually putting a face to everybody and you're engaging them and you're seeing the body language and you're reading beyond the words that are being spoken and the emails that go back and forth. In fact, I would urge you to have weekly meetings, if not daily, if necessary, but ensuring that connectivity to ensure a high level of productivity and people do not feel that they're sitting there isolated and alone when it comes to working. I would urge you to consider upskilling or reskilling. Don't forget the skills that you want from your team members. And it's not just about them, but it's our responsibility also as leaders that we make sure that we upskill them where we need them. Or in some instances, as we're seeing in organizations today, we have to reskill them in certain areas so they can succeed. And I'm going to address that in the continuous learning element a little bit later on. I would also look at business results. For so long, organizations have been weary about sharing openly and transparently their results. And I'm telling you that in times like this, in this new normal that we're in, companies and individuals in companies want to know what's happening all the time. They want to know that whether it's good or bad news that's being shared with them, the results are there, so they recognize where the challenges are, and they will come up to the task and assist you with that as well. It's also about keeping them updated on everything that's going on in the organization. The out of sight, out of mind is not a good motto during these times. So any and all information that's coming through should be shared with your team members, with your colleagues, and ensuring that we have a more holistic environment and more of a team culture that's taking place. I would also urge you to schedule one-on-ones. For those of you that have been holding weekly meetings and you're engaging your people and you're telling me, listen, the team is all over it, these are still individuals, and we have to make sure that we set aside or we carve aside time for the one-on-ones to make sure that we treat these even as face-to-face if they're virtual meetings, but do not leave people thinking that this is just about group dynamic. We have to be able to engage them on a one-on-one basis, particularly to talk about productivity and results that are going on there. And for lightheartedness in the world of feelings, I would urge you also host coffee breaks and lunches, even if you have to do them virtually for those of you that are still on a work from home environment. We don't necessarily have to be in the office for this, and we don't always have to be talking business, but rather engaging your people on a light coffee break or a lunch break where you're eating together or you're sharing a cup of coffee or tea is so critical to ensure that productivity remains high within the organization. Now, in order for us to improve results and get the productivity that we're looking for, there's a few things we have to keep in mind. The first of which is the vision has to have strategic goals. Just to have a big vision of the organization and put that on a wall somewhere is simply not enough. We have to have these goals that go along with it. But even then, those goals have to be broken down into team and individual components that people are able to relate to them on their level, not just the larger strategic goals of the organization. We have to give clear direction and create meaningful work for everyone. It's not one individual gets to do something and not the other, but everybody should know what direction we're heading in and how their work relates into that. And if I can add to that, it would be about everybody understanding their role and what is expected of them. And this is, I think, an area that's become really murky in the last little while, where people are simply not understanding what we want from them and how they can contribute in a proper way to what they do. So they need to see their work in a greater context for them to be able to move forward and participate within the organization. And I would urge you to focus on things that matter. There's been so much that's going on. There's so much that's coming at us that we're getting bogged down with the smallest of aspects rather than on the tasks and the goals that yield results. And we've got to make sure that our focus remains there. So it's about aligning our activities to maximize performance at all levels within the organization to get the results that we're looking for. It has really become as simple as that. And it's about boiling down the big vision to the goals, to individual goals, to the direction and the meaningful work and the roles that people understand to be able to move forward. And if we do that properly, then I can assure you one of the things you do not need to do is hover around your people, whether virtually or physically. If we're giving them the right direction and the roles are clear, give people the space to do what they need to do to achieve the results. And I think people not only would surprise you, but they would inspire you on what they're capable of doing and moving forward. Now, I want to talk about this notion of quality. And I said earlier on that it's productivity, but it's also about quality. Just as much as we've been running towards production and productivity and business results and during the pandemic, we've lost a little bit of the quality that's there. And quality is just as critical, the focus that has to be there. And one of the reasons is people have not been living up to the standards that we might be required has to do with the change that they're going through. And I'm not going to go through the 4 changes of phase with you, but I can tell you that there's a lot of people today in this new normal that are stuck in the resistance phase. They haven't bounced into the exploring. And the reason for that is they say to themselves, I'll wait. Things are bound to go back to normal. And that's not going to happen. But that's where the resistance is coming from. They're hanging in there saying, well, we're not there yet. Things are bound to turn around. And that is not something that we can afford when it comes to quality. And if I can explain what quality is, I tend to equate it to the Olympics. And for those of you that are familiar with the Olympics floor exercises in gymnastics, if you weren't aware, the lowest ranking that an Olympian can get is a 9.4. In fact, that's considered the Olympic standard. And we have a right and a responsibility to demand the Olympic standard from our people. A minimum, a bare minimum for every organization at that 9.4. However, Olympians can reach that ultimate goal and by doing a little bit extra. They receive a 0.2 for the risk they're willing to take in their job, in gymnastics as an example. They receive another 0.2 for originality. And we talked about the FACE's mission of this notion of innovation. And that comes this originality component that's there. And there's another 0.2 for what we refer to as virtuosity. You see, all of us should be operating at that 9.4 Olympic standard. And if we go a little bit extra and we demonstrate risk and originality and virtuosity, we ultimately achieve that perfect 10 that we also desire when it comes to the Olympics. It is no different in the business world, and it's no different for air cargo, where we need to strive for that. And our responsibility in organizations is to push our people into that minimum 9.4 and ultimately that perfect 10. And when we do so, and we focus on the business results that are there, the results that we have, if we know our goals, we determine our tasks, it allows us to spend our time and energy on these tasks. We become much more focused. In fact, when we place overview, structure, and control, it allows us to ensure that we stay in sight and in mind. It allows us to structure for success, and allows us to remain in control of what we do at all times. And last but not least, it allows for time planning. Now, there's different planning techniques for different people, and I often talk about, we all know the elephant technique. How do you eat an elephant? It's one bite size at a time. And that works for a lot of people. And we should not be pushing people and telling them with our deadlines that we got to get things done. We've got to make use of the available time, plan and structure properly, ensuring that we remain on goal and on task for the results that we have. When we do this and we do this properly, it allows us to focus on priorities. It allows us to avoid overload, and it allows us to allocate resources where they are required without spending negatively or withering them away. Now, I want to talk about the team and company pulse, and this is something that's very near and dear to me. We work with a lot of organizations on ensuring that the company pulse remains strong, and we keep a tab on it and recognize how we can do things better. Now, when I talk about this, I'm going to talk about very quickly about what we call the 4-part dashboard when it comes to this. And the first part of that dashboard is strategy, and we're going to look into that. Then we're going to talk about the organization itself and on our effectiveness and alignment. We're going to move into the employee, which is a critical part of the pulse. And last but not least, the organization's agility. And if I start with that very first point on strategic alignment, we really have to ask ourselves, how aligned are we as an organization, both internally and externally? And to do so, I would urge you to reach out to your customers. And by customers, I'm referring to both the internal and the external customer. The internal customer are your colleagues, the people that you work with, the people that you serve within the company, and of course, the external ones are our end users that are out there. But reach out to them and understand where they are and where you are to ensure that there's that strategic alignment. Secondly, I would urge you to reset your priorities to where we are today. It's the priorities that you might have had 6 months ago at the start of this year no longer apply today, and we have to really consider this once more and figure out where we're going. And once we do that, we have to communicate, connect, and repeat this over and over again to individuals in order to ensure that we remain aligned with both our internal and our external stakeholders within the organization. Now, when we talk about organizational effectiveness, we have to really consider how have we been impacted, or how have our operations been impacted over the last little while. So I would ask you to keep an eye on decision-making and cross-functional coordination. I've noticed that a lot of organizations, the pandemic, rather than making us agile and quick thinkers and quick decision makers, it's made it worse, where we're so afraid to act that we're going backwards and we're putting additional layers and layers of approvals. And we have to really look at that and make sure that our decision making is nimble, and we're also able to function and coordinate cross-functionally within the organization. We should encourage our workforce to come up with better ways of working. If there's anything that's great that's come out of this pandemic, it's the fact that organizations have looked inwards and said, hey, can we do things a little bit differently? And some wonderful, innovative ideas have come out there. And it's our job as leaders to encourage that even further. And lastly, I would ensure that your remote workers have the tools and the technology and the training that they need. No matter where they are, for those of you that might be even across the globe, there's a lot of remote elements that are there, and we're expecting them to get things done without giving them the tools or the necessary training. But make sure that you do so, because that is a critical element of our effectiveness and where the new future might be leading us down the road. Now, the third element is employee experience. And really, we have to look at the kind of support we've been giving our staff. And the first thing I would urge you to think about is being flexible. I talked earlier about the rigidity and rules and regulation, and we have to do it this way or that way. That doesn't work. We have to maintain some level of flexibility within the organization. We also have to increase the support that we give immediate managers. I refer to the middle managers as the hinge of an organization. They connect our frontliners or other staff to leadership, and we need to ensure that these people have all of the support they can utilize that they can use in order to be able to succeed in their roles. And last but not least, I would urge you to sustain a sense of community. Bring people back together. We seem to have lost that. We've been running around like chickens with our heads cut off. We've got to come back and make sure that we sustain that, we create that glue of the organization. People are desperate for that community sense, and we have to provide it to them as leaders. And last but not least, I want to talk about organizational agility and how our organization needs to evolve. The first which I would talk about is focus on the small wins and the little innovations. It is no longer about the big idea. It is no longer about the next big thing. It is actually about the small wins and these tiny little innovations when we're doing things a little bit differently. That's what we need to look for today. That's where the agility starts to show itself. It is also about identifying new and emerging needs. As I mentioned earlier on, our ability to be agile as an organization is going to be measured by what can we do differently. Are there emerging needs that we can address and we can move forward within our different markets or our different industries or whatever it might be, our niche is in the industry, we have to be able to go after that. And last but not least, I would urge you to conduct after action reviews. I hear of so many ideas that we're carrying forward, but we're not pausing to say, has this worked? If not, abandon it and move on to the next new and emerging idea or the next little innovation. We need to create these after action reviews. That's how we remain agile, and it allows us to move forward and say, yeah, it's worked, great, let's do more of it, or no, let's abandon it, we tried, let's find another new idea. But we need that level of thinking and that level of review to be able to succeed and move further. Now, we're going to talk about continuous learning. And this is an area that's become so important because the world has genuinely been turned upside down within organizations. In the past, the learning pyramid used to look as follows. You had the company values, that translated itself into a vision. Senior management takes that further. They set the goals and the project, and that finally makes its way down to the employees. Well, I can tell you that that's all changed today. Today, the employee is driving the learning pyramid, and with good reason. And for us to make sure that we remain as what's called a learned organization, we have to make sure that we make everything within the organization about our staff and our employees. What do I mean here? First of which, support teams in the current environment. People are a little bit lost, and there's a lot of learning that needs to be done. One, in how to cope with crises. Two, how to succeed within there, and how to potentially learn or relearn skills. So our job is to make sure that we help people feel secure and prepared for the future. Second to that, it's about treating talent as the scarcest resource. Now, I can tell you, I've been preaching this for a very long time, and we all know this in leaders, they are a scarce resource. But it has never been truer than today, where people need to recognize that there's potential and these colleagues are the most capable that we have, and they are a limited resource that we have, and we've got to treat them as such in order to make sure that we retain them. We have to coach our teams through uncertain times. In fact, now more than ever, people need a sense of purpose. And as leaders, one of the tasks that we have, or one of the skill sets that we require, is our ability to coach others. And now is the time to have that kick in through coaching and mentoring sessions that you can put in there. I love the fact that there's a mentorship program taking place within FACE, as a matter of fact. And as leaders across the organization, you need to be able to do this on an ongoing basis. I would also urge you to enrich the relationships that you have with your team. Excuse me. Use this time to understand them, to recognize that the opportunity to come together and solve problems at the same time. This is the time where we can shine in relationship management and relationship building, particularly when it comes to continuous learning within the organization. And I'll explain what I mean in a moment. Make them shine. Our job as leaders is not to make sure that we have all of the answers. Our job is, in fact, to make sure that we have the right questions and challenge people to think differently and live up to their capabilities. As a leader, your responsibility is to make sure people are learning all the time. And that means posing those challenges to them and let them push and pushing them further ahead. And last but not least, I would urge you to lead with humanity. Provide the reassurances that they desperately need right now, while acknowledging that these are uncertain times. We're seeing the panic that's out there. People worried about what comes next, what to do. Do they still have a job? Our job is to understand that there's a human element that's there. It's not simply about the numbers. It's not simply about the veil that covers leadership or management. We have to be more transparent and lead through that. Now, I'm bringing all of this up because today, becoming a learning organization is so critical. And there are three characteristics that I'm going to talk about. The first of which is adopting an ecosystem mindset. Today, for organizations to succeed, they recognize that they need to build an extensive network of external people, vendors, and partners to create value together. It is no longer about them as individual organizations, but rather about this ecosystem and partnerships that they're creating. And we're seeing this across industries. We are collaborating in ways that we never have before, and that creates learning opportunities and an open mindset within the organization. The second characteristic that's coming forward is this notion of embracing data-rich technology platforms. Today, companies that have the ability to gather, organize, interpret, and act on data is creating a competitive differentiator for them like we've never seen before. That the companies that are embracing this are having the edge amongst others because they're learning at tremendous speed and they're applying that learning. And last but not least, it's this notion of learning how to learn. Organizations today that are equipping their employees and ensuring they're learning and adopting and changing quickly will be better able to thrive and succeed. And let me tell you something. Today, employees are taking it upon themselves to learn new skill sets. In fact, they're recognizing that if I'm today working in operations, tomorrow morning, if my bosses tell me I need to move to finance, I need to move to back office, I need to move to service, whatever it might be in the organization you're working in, that's become the need of the hour. And that means we have to create the environment where people can learn how to learn. And now it is no longer being driven by HR and learning and development. People are driving their own learning, and we have to allow them to do so. That's how we continue to grow as an organization, and we become known as a learned organization when we create those environments. So if we think about these focus areas that we talked about today and driven by that vision, we talked about relationship management and how to build trust, and we have to determine whether we're going to focus on whether we need to build up credibility, intimacy, and or reliability. We need to make sure that we frame the big picture. We talked about productivity and balancing the world of feelings and the world of facts, and ensuring that we create the environment where we drive strategic goals through tasks and meaningful work for everybody. We talked about quality and achieving that Olympic score or the Olympic standard and vying for that perfect 10. We talked about team and company pulse and the 4-part dashboard of organizational effectiveness of employees, of company pulse, of agility, and so on. All of these that factor in to make sure that we have the right pulse on the environment, on the company that we're in. And lastly, we talked about this notion of continuous learning and ensuring that we create the environment for people to learn how to learn, to ensure that we have a data-rich platform that we're using, and definitely an ecosystem mindset that helps everybody that's on there. With that in mind, I'm going to turn it back to David and to Patricia to find out if there's any questions before I wrap up with a couple of more points.
Thank you, Edward, for this presentation. It was super engaging and inspirational. Indeed, we do have a couple of questions on our side that we collected in the chat box. So the first one is, how can I find some time to step back and reflect on the strategy and on all these strategic initiatives when my company is struggling to fight for being in the business?
What an excellent question, as a matter of fact. And I think this is where we do have an opportunity to differentiate ourselves. You're absolutely right. Like many companies today, they're fighting to simply remain in business, let alone to reflect on strategy. But I can tell you that if we are in that fight or flight mode only, where we're fighting fires or putting out fires, or we're dealing with this crisis, and we're not putting it in the context of bigger picture, that means being able to step back and look at, is this really going to save the business, or are we simply saving ourselves for the next week or month? That means we have to carve out time within our calendars and put that time aside and say, listen, if I'm working 9 a.m. to 7 or 8 p.m. so I can survive and simply get through this crisis, you know what? We're going to start at 7:30 in the morning, and we're going to lock in some time to reflect on our strategy, to innovate, to brainstorm, to think about, is there something we need to be doing differently rather than spinning our wheels, trying to save the business the same way we've always done, which is extremely short term. And while you might save the business, I don't think it's going to do any favors over the long haul.
Thank you, Edouard.
Thank you, Edward. We have other questions regarding actually the people that is being forced by the circumstances to change their career or their function in their companies. Do you have any advice for these people?
I would say, again, an excellent point that's bringing up, and we've heard this a lot from so many organizations across the globe. The advice would be embrace it. And I wish we could have embraced it sooner, but the fact of the matter is, I think people who are being asked to do something different, compared to many people who are being asked to leave the company, job losses, it's a godsend or certainly a blessing to be able to have that opportunity. Number two, I've found in so many companies, including my own, where it is unbelievable the new talent or skills that we're uncovering when people are moved into another role. Some of them have done it on their own. They've picked up new skill sets. They've tried to learn something different to find out how they can contribute to the organization. So I would urge you to think of it as a learning opportunity. Things could be far worse, and really embrace it. Learn the skills that are necessary for this new role or new function that you're being asked to do.
Thank you. We have another question. You spoke about quick wins and innovative agility. Do you have examples of innovations that can contribute to organizational agility?
I think that'd be a bit of a challenge to answer without a particular industry or line that's in there. However, I would tell you that I'm going to use big examples of course, innovation. They're nothing new to us. But if you look back at the creation of companies like Airbnb or Uber and so on, you will recognize that they came out of crises, predominantly recessions. And the reason I'm bringing these up as an example is because they really highlight that innovation is often mistaken for invention, and it's not. Innovation is looking at a situation in your current state and looking, can I do something differently with a product or a service that yields the results that my customer is looking for? So it is really, again, about self-reflection and looking at ways where we can innovate within the organization to get things done. I come from a very traditional business. We do learning and development and culture transformations in organizations. And for the longest time, as much as we've been virtual or available virtual, clients tell us that, well, it's not the same as doing it virtually. Well, guess what? We're in the virtual world today. We're delivering, we're creating solutions, we're delivering digital workbooks. We've gone paperless. The world, it's tiny innovations that really, when you look at the same problem with a different lens, you'll be amazed at what we can come up with. And I suspect that there's a lot that can happen, and we're seeing it, in fact, in aviation, that there are multiple levels of innovation that's taking place. People are looking at logistics differently, how they get goods from point A to point B. They're looking at booking systems. Everything is being looked at with an innovative lens to see, can we get better efficiencies going, and that sense of agility. And I think we're going to see more and more examples come out over the coming 6 to 12 months, as a matter of fact.
Thank you, Edward. Another question. You talk about the importance of training in this context, but how can we persuade managers that spending on training in this situation is actually still necessary?
That's a fair question. Look, there's 2 points there. Number one, the world has changed, and I would urge people that training and or learning, there is nothing wrong with this taking place also on our personal time. At the end of the day, if I'm training myself on a new skill set or I'm learning something different so I can contribute, I'm not just contributing to the organization, but rather I'm also contributing to my personal and professional growth. So I think people today who want to become more relevant to the organization, who want to ensure that they can be called upon when times are difficult, when they need to choose those jobs, that they're prepared. And that means there's some sacrifices that have to be made where I'm upskilling myself on my time. That's one side. On the other side, I think a business case has to be made even to managers, that we have to be able to point out the end game. Managers today, and there's a reason I mentioned that we have to show support to our immediate managers and those middle managers, because they're the ones stuck. They're being squashed down by senior leadership, and they're trying to support the frontliners, and they're trying to juggle all of this all at the same time. We need to help make the case for them to see the end game. That with this kind of training, here's what will happen. Here are the efficiencies that we'll produce, and we have to fight for that. And so it's not about waiting around and let's get approvals. Get it done yourself, but that's not the only way. You also need to make that business case to managers to make them recognize where that payoff will be for training. More than ever today, we're asking ourselves return on investment and return on people. And we have to be able to answer one of those two to our managers for them to give the go-ahead.
Okay, thank you, Edward. Another question. I am a manager in a company which is going under restructuring. How can I keep my employee engaged as my top management doesn't share with me the strategic plans?
Very good. Look, and you know what? This is definitely not the first time I hear this concern where, as a manager or as a leader, you almost wear your heart on your sleeve, and your heart goes out to your team members. And if you're not getting transparency from the top, and there's restructuring going on under a veil of secrecy, this falls on your shoulders. One is the simple answer, of course, is demand that transparency from senior leadership, and make it as bleak as possible. That if that's not transparent, the team will walk out, and it's as simple as that. There's nothing to restructure then. However, let me go back to the team dynamic. I think you sharing as much as you know, and remaining transparent with them will create a sense of loyalty to you as a manager. And the loyalty may not be entirely there to the organization at that point, unfortunately, but at the very least, it's there to you as a manager and a leader. And if they can see your genuine self and your honesty that's there, and they recognize that you're in the same boat as them, and you work together on making sure that you both, manager and employees, stay relevant to the organization, even during the restructuring, and you state that you keep that level of engagement high, I think that'll win a lot of points between one another to continue to be engaged and producing as expected.
Thank you, Edward. We have a last question before closing. Do you think that instability will be the new normal, or we will go back to the world of before, for calling it in a way?
I think instability will go away. It has in every crisis, whether it was a major war or a pandemic of sorts, or as we are seeing now. Instability, we know, does not last forever. I think, however, when we're so mired with the unknown, it's very hard to recognize when that stability will come in. Will we go back to the way things were? I don't think so. I think a lot of good, as much as a lot of challenges, have come out of this current period, where people are thinking differently, are getting the job done in a different way. We're collaborating in more ways than we used to, and companies have managed in some instances to even bring people together virtually and look out for one another. I think embracing that new normal is very important, while recognizing that, look, there's always a light at the end of the tunnel. I wish, like everybody else, I knew when that is. But I do know that it is there, and we've seen so many organizations in ICT, in logistics, in various areas, and online retailing thrive within this period and make the most of it. And I think as more traditional industries will lag, there will come a time of stability where they too will find ways of doing things differently and better eventually.
Perfect. Thank you, Edward. We just saved the last 2 minutes. If you have the last word or wrap up of this session.
I will leave you with some final remarks on the next slide, David, if that's okay. And that's from one of my favorite football stars, Pele, who says, "Success is no accident. It is hard work, perseverance, learning, studying, sacrifice, and most of all, love of what you're doing or learning to do." And I think those words always resonate, and I carry them with me when it comes to this leading in the new normal, recognizing that it's not going to come easy. It is going to require a lot of things from us, and love for what we're doing is a critical one in that equation.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Edward. Thank you very much, the CCM consultancy team, for putting that together. I hope that you guys on the other side, you enjoyed this session. I did, Patricia did, and I think that the questions shows that the topic is very relevant and fit in the context. And I think that Edward, you shared really good insights to help us to move forward in this
Thank you very much, David. Thank you, Patricia, as well. Really wonderful to be with everybody, and I do wish everyone all the best of luck.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.